Hello and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live. It is Pandemic Monday, as we call it here uh, at Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am Bo Heckman, and we have our guest reader back today, Oscar de las Salas, reading Love in the Time of Cholera. It's been a while. How are you?
Very good. I know last week someone else took my place.
Yes, we diverted
It
for
was
a
fantastic.
very interesting topic and a story, and now we're back here. How was it having a week off?
It was amazing to hear last week the story of the Terry family and the impact of a poet in politics. It was quite exciting to hear that.
It was a fascinating story. It was really in depth. It was sort of outside the box of what we normally do on Storytime Theater, and I think it sort of raised the bar. And I'm kind of like, what can we do next that is as challenging and interesting as a topic? So I'm sure we'll find something here sometime soon to amaze. I'm looking forward to it.
Maybe what is coming
So
on fall. Maybe what is coming this fall. What is coming this fall?
what is coming this fall? We've got our fall festival coming up. Tickets are on sale to now. We have an incredible lineup of people performing. We've got Patrick Page, we've got Trezana Beverly, Deborah Ann Bird, and Lisa Volpe all performing, and tickets are on sale for this amazing event. I would look into this. For more information on this, please write to info@swshakespeare.org. I will throw up a little thing here so you can see now. Please write
Mhm.
to this email address for more information. You'll be glad you did. This is a very, very special event. We've got Patrick Page, as I said before, from Broadway's Hadestown, and many other performances. Too many to name here. And Tony Award winner Trezana Beverly, Deborah Ann Bird, who is a favorite amongst Harlem Shakespeare and Southwest Shakespeare alike. Just amazing performer. And we also have Lisa Volpe, a very, very talented artist. Just amazing lineup. It staggers the mind. And so just please look into this if you have more information. I'll stop babbling about it right now and turn things over to Oscar de las Salas. First, please tell us, where are we in the story since it's been a little bit in Love in the Time of Cholera?
So we're walking through their early love. By the way, we're almost half through the book. So those of you who just joined us to your lunchtime to listen to Love on the Time of Cholera, myself and my accent reading this book, the story is going through the beginning. The beginning actually is walking through the love affair between these two characters and this other third person that later on Fermina Daza married Dr. Juvenal Urbino. And that's what I'm wearing my hat on. You will find out more as I read through the book.
Well, I love the hat. It's very stylish. And I will turn things over to you and have a great time. It's great to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back, and thank you to all of you. So, if you're just tuning in, we are reading Love in Time, written by Nobel Prize winner Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And this is the book that I'm reading. And if you are following along, which I'm very surprised, a lot of you are, we're on page 116. Now, I'm going to tell you something regarding the book. Um, this is funny, actually, because some of you are listening to me reading on Fridays in Spanish, en Espanol. And today I'm reading in English. So, funny enough, there's some people reading both with me in Spanish and in English. So, it's quite exciting to see that through literature, we learn another language. Not necessarily the books that we read for to learn a language, but through literature, you can learn another language. That was my case. Literature and music. Um, anyway, that's a personal note. I'm sorry, I'm going to have a sip of water. and we are going to start reading where we left off, this wonderful love story. So you see me today wearing a palm hat that is part of the Colombian tradition of the Andes. And at that time, at the beginning of the century, 19th century, 1900, beginning of 20th century, many of the illustrious people that left the country went to Europe, and most of them were their typical Colombian hats and typical Colombian looks, such as dress in linen, which is one of my favorite fabrics, and I still do wear linen. And that was what Dr. Juvenal Urbino wore. It was the character, what the character wore during the book. In comparison, the other character of the story wears long coats, dark wool type of material, and in black, where Dr. Juvenal Urbino wears it um, light and airy. The other character wears it dark and heavy, and that's a comparison we're going to walk through slowly through the book. So where we? So let's just catch up on what happened the last time. I'm on page 115, and we're going through Dr. Juvenal Urbino's life. He's a doctor. Remember, he came back from Paris, and he was following along the love to Fermina Daza, and he was asking for her hand in order to date her at the very beginning with the permission of Fermina's dad. Um, let's see where we were. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to go on page 115. We'll find out a little bit where we were. Jesus, I even have receipts here. Not to mention that I take my book everywhere. It was, in fact, the result of a clinical error. A physician who was a friend of his thought he detected the warning symptoms of cholera. In an 18-year-old patient, he asked Dr. Juvenal Urbino to see her. He called that very afternoon, alarmed at the possibility that the plague had entered the sanctuary of the old city. For all cases until that time had occurred in the poor neighborhoods and almost of those among the black population. He encountered all less unpleasant surprises. From the outside, the house, shaded by the almond trees in the Park of Evangels, appeared in ruins, as did the others in the colonial district. But inside, there was a harmony of beauty, an astonishing light that seemed to come from another age. Oh, that's right. That's right. Dr. Juvenal Urbino was called to see Fermina Daza because she had some symptoms of cholera, and he was specialized in infectious diseases in Paris, and he was the only doctor in the area that was able to assess cholera. So off we go. The entrance opened directly into a square civilian patio that was white in the recent coat of lime and had flowering orange trees, and the same tiles on the floor as on the walls. There was an invisible sound of running water, and pots with carnations on the cornices, and the cages of strange birds in arcades. The strangest of all were three crows in a very large cage who filled the patio with an ambiguous perfume every time they flapped their wings. Several dogs chained elsewhere in the house began to bark, maddened by the scent of stranger. But a woman's shout stopped them dead, and numerous cats leapt around the patio and hid among the flowers, frightened by the authority in the voice. Then there was such a diaphanous silence that despite the order of the birds and the syllables of the water and stone, one could hear the desolate breath of the sea. Shaken by the conviction of checking by the conviction that God was present, Dr. Juvenal Urbino thought that such a house was immune to the plague. He followed Gala Placidia, that's the maid, along the arcaded corridor. He passed the window of the sewing room where Florentino Ariza, that's the other character that is in love with Fermina Daza, had seen Fermina Daza for the first time. When the patio was still a shambles, climbed the new marble stairs to the second floor and waited to be announced before going into the patient's room. But Gala Placidia came out again with a message. The senorita says you cannot come in you cannot come in now because her papa is not at home. And so he returned back at 5 in the afternoon, in accordance with the maid's instructions. And Lorenzo Daza himself opened the street door and led him into the daughter's bedroom. There he remained, sitting in a dark corner with his arms folded, and making futile efforts to control his rage breathing during the examination. It was not easy to know who was more constrained, the doctor with his chaste touch, or the patient in the silk chemise with her virgin's modesty. But neither one looked the other one in the eye. He asked the questions in an impersonal voice, and she responded in a tremulous voice, both of them very conscious of the man sitting in the shadows. At last, Dr. Juvenal Urbino asked the patient to sit up, and with exquisite care, he opened her nightdress gown down to the waist, her pure high breasts with the childish nipples shown for an instant in the darkness of the bedroom, like a flash of gunpowder. Before she hurried to cover them with crossed arms, imperturbable, the physician opened her arms without looking at her and examined her by direct auscultation, his ear against her skin. First the chest, then the back. Dr. Juvenal Urbino used to say that he experienced no emotion when he met the woman with whom he lived until the day of his death. He remembered the sky blue chemise etched in lace, the feverish eyes, the long hanging loose hair over her shoulders. But he was so concerned with the outbreak of the cholera in the colonial district that he took no notice of her flowing, flowering adolescence, like a flower, of course. He had eyes only for the slightest hint that she may be a victim of the plague. She was more explicit. The young doctor she had heard so much about in connection with the cholera epidemic seemed a pedant incapable of loving anyone by himself. The diagnosis was intestinal infection of alimentary origin, which was cured by 3 days of treatment at home. Relieved by the proof that his daughter had not contracted the cholera, Lorenzo Daza accompanied the doctor to the door of his carriage, paid him with a gold peso for the visit, a fee that seemed excessive even for a physician to the rich, and he said goodbye with immoderate expressions of gratitude. He was overwhelmed by the splendor of the doctor's family's names, and he not only did not hide it, but would have done anything to see him again under a less formal circumstances. The case should have been considered closed, but on Tuesday of the following week, without being called and with no prior announcement, Dr. Juvenal Urbino returned to the house at the inconvenient hour of 3 in the afternoon. Fermina Daza was in the sewing room, having a lesson in oil painting with two of her friends. Then he appeared at the window in his spotless white frock coat and his white top hat and signaled to her to come on him. She put her palette down on a chair and tiptoed to the window, her ruffled skirt raised to keep to keep it dragging from the floor. She wore a diadem with a jewel that hung from her forehead, and the luminous stone was the same aloof color as her eyes, and everything in her breathed aura of coolness. The doctor was struck by the fact that she was dressed for painting at home, as if she were going to a party. He took her pulse through the open window, had her stick out her tongue, and examined her throat with an aluminum tongue depressor. He looked inside her lower eyelids, and each time he nodded in approval. He was less inhibited than on the previous visit, but she was more so, because she could not understand the reason for the unexpected examination if he himself had said that he would not come back unless they call him because of some change. And even more important, she did not ever want to see him again. When she finished his examination, the doctor put the tongue depressor back into his bag, crowded with other instruments and bottles of medicine, and closed it with a resounding snap. You are like a new sprung rose, he said. Thank you. Thank God, he said. And he misquoted St. Thomas. Remember that everything that is good, whatever its origin, comes from the Holy Spirit. Do you like music? What's the point of that question? She asked in return. Music is so important for one's health, he said. He really thought it was, and she was going to know it very soon, and for the rest of her life, that the topic of music was almost a magic formula that he used to propose friendship. But at that moment, she interpreted as a joke. Besides, her two friends, who had pretended to paint while she and Dr. Juvenal Urbino were talking at the window, tittered and hid their faces behind their palettes, and this made Fermina Daza lose her self-control. Blind with fury, she slammed the window shut. The doctor stared at the sheer lace curtains in bewilderment. He tried to find the street door but lost his way. And his confusion, he knocked into the cage with the perfume crows. They broke into sort of shrieking, flapped their wings in fright, and saturated the doctor's clothing with a feminine fragrance. The thundering voice of Lorenzo Daza rooted him to the spot. Doctor, wait for me. He had seen everything from the upper floor and swollen and livid. He came down to the stairs, buttoning his shirt, his side whiskers still in uproar after a restless siesta. The doctor tried to overcome his embarrassment. I told your daughter that she's like a rose, he said. True enough, said Lorenzo Daza, but one with too many thorns. He walked past Dr. Urbino without even greeting him. He pushed open the sewing room and shouted a rough command to his daughter. Come here and beg the doctor's pardon. The doctor tried to intervene and stop him, but Lorenzo Daza paid no attention to him. He insisted, hurry up! She looked at her friends with a secret plea for understanding, and she said to the father that she had nothing to beg pardon for. She had only closed the window to keep the sun out, to keep out the sun. Dr. Urbino, with good humor, tried to confirm her words, but Lorenzo Daza insisted that he be obeyed. Then Fermina Daza, pale with rage, turned toward the window and extending her right foot. As she raised her skirt with her fingertip, she made a theatrical curtsy to the doctor. I give you my most heartfelt apologies, sir, she said. Dr. Juvenal Urbino imitated her with good humor, making a cavalier's flourish with his top hat. But he did not win the compassionate smile that he had hoped for. Then Lorenzo Daza invited him to have a cup of coffee in his office to set things right. And he accepted with pleasure so that there would be no doubt whatsoever that he did not harbor a shred of resentment in his heart. The truth was that Dr. Juvenal Urbino did not drink any coffee, except for a cup first thing in the morning. He did not drink alcohol either, except for a glass of wine with meals on solemn occasions. But he not only drank down the coffee that Lorenzo Daza offered him, he also accepted the glass of anisette. Then he accepted another coffee with another anisette, and then another, and another. With attention to the excuses that Lorenzo Daza continued to offer in the name of his daughter, whom he defined as an intelligent and serious girl, worthy of a prince wherever he came from, here or anywhere else, whose only defect, so he said, was her mulish character. But after the second anisette, the doctor, through her heart, through oh, thought he heard Fermina Das's voice at the other end of the patio, and his imagination went after her, follow her through the night that he has just descended in the house, as she lit the lights in the corridor, fumigated the bedrooms with the insecticide bomb, uncovered the pot of soup on the stove, which she was going to share that night with her father. The two of them alone at the table, she not raising her eyes, not tasting the soup, not breaking the rancorous spell until he was forced to give in and ask her to forgive his severity that afternoon. Dr. Urbino knew enough about women to realize that Fermina Daza would not pass by the office until he left. But he stayed nevertheless because he felt that wounded pride would give him no peace after the humiliations of that afternoon. Lorenzo Daza, who by now was almost drunk, did not seem to notice his lack of attention, for he was satisfied with his own indomitable eloquence. He talked at the gallop, chewing the flower of he talked at full gallop, like me sometimes, chewing the flower of his unlit cigar, coughing in shouts, trying to clear his throat, attempting to greet difficulty to find comfortable position in the swivel chair, who springs well like an animal in heat. That's funny. He had drunk 3 glasses of said to each one, drunk by his guest. He paused only when he realized that they could no longer see each other. He stood up to the light to lit the lamp. Dr. Juvenal Urbino looked at him in the new light. He saw that one eye was twisted like a fish, and that his words did not correspond to the movement of his lips. And he thought these were hallucinations brought on by the abuse of alcohol. Then he stood up with the fascinating sensation that he was inside a body that belonged not to him, but to someone who was still in the chair where he had been sitting. And he had to make a great effort not to lose his mind. It was after 7 o'clock when he left the office, preceded by Lorenzo Daza. There was a full moon. The patio, idealized by the anisette floated at the bottom of an aquarium, and the cages covered with cloths looked like ghosts sleeping under the hot scent of new orange blossoms. The sewing room window was open. There was a lighted lamp on the work table, and the unfinished paintings were on the easels as if they were on exhibit. Where art do that do are not here, said Dr. Urbino as he passed, but Fermina Daza did not hear him. She could not hear him because she was crying with rage in her bedroom, laying face down on the bed and waiting for her father so that she could make him pay for the afternoon's humiliation. The doctor did not renounce his hope of saying goodbye to her, But Lorenzo Daza did not suggest it. He yearned for the innocence of her pulse, her cat's tongue, the tender tonsils, but he was disheartened by the idea that she never wanted to see him again and would never permit him to try to see her. When Lorenzo Daza walked into the entryway, the cross, awake until the sheets under sheets, emitted a funeral shriek. They will pick out your eyes, the doctor said aloud, thinking of her. And Lorenzo Daza turned around to ask him what he had said. It was not for me, he said. It was for the anesthetic. Lorenzo Daza took him to the carriage, trying to force him to accept a gold peso for the second visit, but he would not take it. He gave the correct instructions to the driver for taking him to the houses of the two patients he still had to see, and he climbed into the carriage without help. But he began to feel sick as he bounced along the cobbled streets, so that he ordered the driver to take a different route. He looked at himself for a moment in the carriage mirror and saw that his image, too, was still thinking about Fermina Daza. He shrugged his shoulders. Then he belched, lowering his head to the chest, and fell asleep. And in his dream, he began to hear funeral bells. First, he heard those of the cathedral, and then he heard those of all the other churches, one after another, even cracked pots of St. Julian the Hospitaller. Shit! He murmured in his sleep. The dead have died. His mother and sister were having café con leche, coffee and milk, and crullers for supper at the formal table in the large dining room when they saw him appear in the door. His face haggard and his entire being dishonored by the whorish, the whorish perfume of the crowd. Of the crowd. The largest bell of the adjacent cathedral resounded in the immense empty space of the house. His mother asked him in alarm where in the world he had been, for they had looked everywhere for him so that he could attend General Ignacio Maria, the last grandson of the Marquis de Jaraiz, who had been struck down that afternoon by a cerebral hemorrhage. It was for him that the bells were tolling. Dr. Juvenal Urbino listened to his mother without hearing her, as he clutched the dark frame, and then he gave a half turn, trying to reach his bedroom, but he fell flat on his face in an explosion of star anise vomit. Mother of God, shouted the mother, something very strange must have happened for you to show up in your own house in this state. The strangest thing, however, had not yet occurred. Taking advantage of the visit of the famous pianist Romeo Lussus, who played a cycle of Mozart sonatas as soon as the city had recovered from mourning the death of General Ignacio Maria, Dr. Juvenal Urbino had the piano from the music school placed in a mule-drawn wagon and brought history-making serenade to Fermina Daza. She was awakened by the first measures, and she did not have to look out the grating of the balcony to know who was the sponsor of that uncommon tribute. The only thing she regretted was not having the courage of other harassed maidens who had emptied their chamber pots on the heads of unwanted suitors. Lorenzo Daza, on the other hand, dressed without delay as the serenade was playing, and when it was over, he had Dr. Juvenal Urbino and the pianist, still wearing the formal concert clothes, come into the visitors' parlor, where he thanked them for the serenade with a glass of good brandy. Firmina Daza soon realized that her father was trying to soften her heart. The day after the serenade, he said to her in a casual manner, "Imagine how your mother would feel if she knew you were being courted by an urbino de la calle." Her dry response was, "She would turn over in her grave." The friends who painted with her told her that Lorenzo Daza had been invited to lunch at the social club by Dr. Juvenal Urbino, who had received a severe reprimand for breaking club rules. It was only then that she learned that her father had applied for the membership in the social club on several occasions, and that each time he had been rejected with such a large number of black balls that another attempt was not possible. But Lorenzo Daza had an infinite capacity for assimilating humiliations, and he continued his indigenous strategies for arranging casual encounters with Dr. Juvenal Urbino, not realizing that it was Juvenal Urbino who went out of his way to let himself be encountered. At times, they spent hours chatting in the office, while the house seemed suspended at the edge of time because Fermina Daza would not permit anything to run its normal course until he left. The parish cafe was a good intermediate heaven. It was there that Lorenzo Daza gave Juvenal Urbino his first lessons on chess, and he was such a diligent pupil that chess became an incurable addiction that tormented him until the day of his death. One night, a short while after the serenade by solo piano, Lorenzo Daza discovered a letter, its envelope sealed with wax, in the entryway to his house. It was addressed to his daughter, and the monogram JUC was imprinted on the seal. He slipped it under the door as he passed Fermina's bedroom, and she never understood how it had come there, since it was inconceivable to her that her father had changed so much that he would bring her a letter from a suitor. She left it on the night table, for the truth was she did not know what to do with it, and there stayed unopened for several days, until one rainy afternoon when Fermina Daza dreamed that Juvenal Urbino had returned to the house to give her the tongue depressor he had used to examine her throat. In her dream, the tongue depressor was made of not aluminum, but of a delicious metal that she tasted with pleasure in other dreams, so that she broke it in two unequal pieces and gave him the smaller one. When she awoke, she opened the letter. It was brief and proper, and all that Dr. Juvenal Urbino asked was the permission to request her father's permission to visit her. She was impressed by its simplicity and seriousness, and the rage she had cultivated with so much love for so many days had faded away on the spot. She kept the letter in the bottom of her trunk, but she remembered that she had also kept Florentino Ariza's perfumed letter there, and she took it out of the chest to find another place for it, shaken by a rush shame. Then it seemed that most decent thing to do was to pretend she had not received it, and she burned it in the lamp, watching how the drops of wax exploded into blue bubbles above the flame. She sighed, poor man, and then she realized that it was the second time she had said those words in little more than 1 year. And for a moment, she thought about Florentino Ariza, and even she was surprised about how removed was she from her life. Poor man. Three more letters arrived with the last rains of October. Then, the first of them, accompanied by a little box of violet pastils from Flavigny Abbey. Flavigny, Flavigny Abbey. Two had been delivered at the door by Dr. Rubino's coachman, and the doctor had greeted Gala Placidia, the maid, from the carriage window. First, so that there would be no doubt that the letters were his, and second, so that no one could tell him that they had not been received. Moreover, both of them were sealed with a monogram in wax and written in the cryptic scrawl that Fermina Daza already recognized as the physician handwriting. Both of them said in substance what had been said in the first, and were conceived in the same submissive spirit, but underneath their property one could begin to detect an impatience that was never evident in the parsimonious letters of Florentino Ariza. The difference between these two, right? Florentino Ariza was a poet, and Dr. Rubino was a man who was just an action man. He wanted to make sure that he was dating her, while Florentino Ariza was the poet. The difference between the type of love or the type of lover. Fermina Daza read them as soon as they were delivered, 2 weeks apart, and without knowing why, she changed her mind as she as she was about to throw them into the fire, but she never thought of answering them. The third letter in October had been slipped under the street door and was in every way different from the previous ones. The handwriting was so childish that there was no doubt it had been scrawled with the left hand. But Fermina Daza did not realize that until the text itself proved to be a poisoned pen letter. Whoever had written it took for granted that Fermina Daza had bewitched Dr. Juvenal Rubino with her love potions. And from that supposition, sinister conclusions had been drawn. It ended with a threat. If Fermina Daza did not renounce her efforts to move up in the world by means of the most desirable man in the city, she would be exposed to public disgrace. She felt herself victim of a great injustice, and her reaction was not vindictive. On the contrary, she would have liked to discover who the author of the anonymous letter was in order to convince him of his error with all the pertinent explanations, for she felt certain that never, for any reason, would she respond to the wooing of Dr. Juvenal Urbino. In the days that followed, she perceived two more unsigned letters, as perfidious as the first, but none of the three seemed to be written by the same person. Either she was the victim of a plot, or the false version of her secret love affair had gone further than anyone could imagine. She was disturbed by the idea that it was all the result of a simple indiscretion on the part of Dr. Juvenal Urbino. It occurred, it occurred to her that perhaps he was different from his worthy appearance, that perhaps he talked too much when he was making house calls and boasted of imagery conquests, as did so many other men of his class. She thought about writing him a letter to reproach him for the insult to her honor. But then she decided against the idea because that might be just what he wanted. She tried to learn more from the friends who painted with her in the sewing room, but they had heard only comments concerning the serenade by the solo piano. She felt furious, impotent, humiliated, in contrast to her initial feeling that she wanted to meet with her invisible enemy in order to convince him of his errors. Now she only wanted to cut him to ribbons with the pruning shears. She spent sleepless nights analyzing details and phrases in the anonymous letters in the hope of finding some shred of comfort. It was a vain hope, for Minadasa was, by nature, alien to the inner world of Urbino de la Calle family, and she had weapons for defending herself from their good actions but not from the evil ones. This conviction became even more bitter after the fear caused by the black doll that was sent to her without any letter. But those origins seem easy to imagine. Dr. Juvenal Urino could have sent it. He had been brought in he had been brought in Martinique. That's the island of Martinique. According, by the way, that's a lot of voodoo in the Caribbean because there's Afro influence in the Caribbean. And I remember outside, gosh, this is a personal note. I remember outside Cartagena, which is the city where the novel takes place, there were um, not magicians. How do you call those? Ladies that, I mean, witches. I mean, bad and good, and you paid money for them to do all sorts of crazy stuff. Anyway, let's see what happens. Wow. Where was I? She spent sleepless nights analyzing details and phrases in the anonymous letters in the hope of finding some shred of comfort. It was a vain hope, for Minadasa was by nature alien to the inner world of Urbino de la Calle family, and she had weapons for defending herself from their good actions, but not from their evil ones. Oh, maybe it was the sisters. Maybe it were the sisters. I can't, anyway, this conviction became even more bitter after the fear caused by the black doll that was sent to her without any letter, but whose origins seemed easy to imagine. Dr. Juvenal Urbino could have sent it. It was being brought in Martinique, according to the original tag, and it was dressed in an exquisite gown, its hair rippled with gold threads, and its closed eyes when she lay down. It seemed so charming to Fermina Daza that she overcame her scruples and lay it on her pillow during the day and grew accustomed to sleep with it at night. After a time, however, she discovered when she awoke from an exhausting dream that the doll was growing. The original exquisite dress she had arrived in was up above her thighs, and her shoes had burst from the pressure of her feet. Firmina Daza had heard of African spells, but no one as frightening as this. On the other hand, she could not imagine that a man like Juvenal Urbino would be capable of such an atrocity. She was right. The doll had been brought not by his coachman, but by an itinerant shrimp monger whom no one knew. Trying to solve the enigma, Fermina Daza thought for a moment of Florentino Ariza, whose depressed condition caused her dismay. But life convinced her of her error. Oh. The mystery was never clarified, and just thinking about it made her shudder with the fear long after she was married and had children and thought of herself as Destiny's darling, the happiest woman in the world. Dr. Urbino's last resort for the meditation of her sister Franca, her sister Franca de la Luz, like Franca of the Light, superior of the Academy of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin, who could not deny the request of a family that had supported her community since its establishment in the Americas. She appeared one morning at 9 o'clock in company of a novice, and for a half an hour the two of them had to amuse themselves with the bird cages while Fermina Daza finished her bath. She was a masculine German with a metallic accent and an imperious gaze that had no relationship to her puerile passions. Fermina Daza hated her and everything that had to do with her more than anything in this world, and the mere memory of her false pity made scorpions crawl in her belly. Just the sight of her from the bathroom door was enough to revive the torture of school, the unbearable boredom of daily mass, the terror of examinations, the servile diligence of the novices, all of that life distorted by the prism of spiritual poverty. Sister Franca de la Luz, on the other hand, greeted her with a joy that seemed sincere. She was surprised at how much she had grown and matured, and she praised the God judgment which she had managed the house, the good taste evident in the patio, the brazier field with orange blossoms. She ordered the novice to wait for her without getting too close to the crows, who in careless movement might peck out your eyes. And she looked for a private spot where she could sit down and talk along with Vermina, who invited her into the drawing room. It was a brief and bitter visit. Sister Franca de la Luz, wasting no time on formalities, offered honorable restraint to Florentina Daza. The reason for her expulsion would be erased not only from the records but also from the memory of the community, and these would allow her to finish her studies and receive her baccalaureate degree. Fermina Daza was perplexed and wanted to know why. It is the request of someone who deserves everything he desires and whose only wish is to make you happy, said the nun. Do you know who that is? Then she understood. She asked, she asked herself with what authority a woman who had made her life miserable because of an innocent letter served as a misery of love, but she did not dare to speak of it. Instead, she said yes, she knew that man, and by the same token, she also knew that he had no right to interfere in her life. All he asks is that you allow him to speak with you for 5 minutes, said the nun. I am certain your father will agree. Firmina's Das's anger grew more intense at the idea that her father was an accessory to the visit. We saw each other twice when I was sick, she said. Now there's no reason for us to see each other again. For any woman with a shred of sense, that man is a gift from the divine providence, said the nun. She continued to speak of his virtues and his devotion, of his dedication of serving those in pain. As she spoke, she pulled from her sleeve a gold rosary with Christ carved in the marble and dangled it in front of Fermina Dass's eyes. It was a family heirloom from more than 100 years old, carved by the goldsmith from Siena in Italy and blessed by Clement IV. It is yours, she said. Fermina Daza felt the blood pounding through her veins, and then she dared. I do not understand. How can you lend yourself to this? She said. If you think that love is a sin. Sister Franca de la Cruz pretended not to notice the remark, but her eyelids flamed. She continued to dangle the rosary in front of Fermina Daza's eyes. It would be better for you to come to understanding with me, she said. because after me comes His Grace the Archbishop, and it's a very different story with him. Let it come, said Fermina Daza. Sister Franca de la Luz tucked the gold rosary into her sleeve. Then from the other she took a well-used handkerchief squeezed into a ball and held it tight on her fist, looking at Fermina Daza from her great distance and with a smile of commiseration. My poor child, she sighed. She sighed. You're still thinking about that man. Fermina Daza chewed on her impertinence as she looked at the nun without blinking. Look at straight Look at her straight in the eye without speaking, chewing in her silence, until she saw with infinite satisfaction that those masculine eyes had filled with tears. Sister Franca de la Luz dried them with the ball of the handkerchief and stood up. Your father is right when he says that you are a mule, she said. The archbishop did not come, so the siege might have ended that day if Hildebrand Sanchez, the cousin, remember, had to arrive to spend Christmas with her cousin. And life changed for both of them. They met her on the schooner from Riohacha at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, surrounded by a crowd of passengers, half dead from the seasickness, but she walked off the boat radiant, very much a woman, and excited after the bad night at sea. She arrived with crates of live turkeys and all the fruits of her fertile lands so that no one would lack of her food during her visit. Lysimaco Sanchez, her father, sent a message asking if they need musicians for the holiday parties because he had he had the best at his disposal, and he promised to send a load of fireworks later on. He also announced that he could not come for his daughter before March, so there was plenty of time for them to enjoy life. The two cousins began at once. From the first afternoon, they bathed together, naked, the two of them making their reciprocal ablutions with water from their cistern. They soaped each other, they removed each other's knits, they compared each other's buttocks, their quiet breasts, each looking at herself, others in the mirror, to judge with what cruelty the time had threat, threat, treated them. Sorry, cruel time treated them since the last occasion when they had seen each other undressed. Hildebranda was large and solid, with golden skin, but all the hair on her body was like a mulatta's, as short and curly as steel wool. Firmina Daza, on the other hand, had a pale nakedness, with long lines, serene skin, and straight hair. Gala Placidia had two identical beds placed in the bedroom, but at times they lay together in one and talked in the dark until dawn. They smoked long, thin highwayman cigars that Hildebranda had hidden in the lining of her trunk, and afterward they had to burn Armenian paper to purify the rank smell they left behind in the bedroom. Fermina Daza had smoked for the first time in Valledupar and had continued in Fonseca and in Riohacha. Those are cities in the coast of Colombia, where as many as 10 cousins will lock themselves in a room to talk about men and to smoke. She learned to smoke backward, with the lead end on her mouth. The women smoked at night during the wars so that the glow of their cigarettes would not betray them. But she had never smoked alone. With Hildebranda in her house, she smoked every night before going to bed. And it was then that she acquired the habit, although she was always hidden, even from her husband and her children, not only because it was it was thought to be improper for a woman to smoke in public, but because she associated the pleasure with secrecy. Hildebranda's trip had also been imposed by her parents in an effort to put distance between her and her impossible love, although they wanted her to think that it was to help Fermina decide on a good match. Hildebranda had accepted, hoping the mock forgetfulness her cousin had done before her. She had arranged with the telegraph operator in Fonseca to send her messages with the greatest prudence, and that is why her delusion was so bitter when she learned that Fermina Daza had rejected Florentino Ariza. Moreover, Hildebranda had a universal conception of love, and she believed that whatever happened to one love affected all other loves throughout the world. Still, she did not renounce her plan. With an audacity that caused a crisis of dismay in Fermina Daza. She went to the telegraph office alone, intending to win the favor of Florentino Ariza. Oh, I can't remember. I forgot about this one. She would not have recognized him, for there was nothing about him that corresponded to the image that she formed from Fermina Daza. At first glance, it seemed impossible that her cousin could have been on the verge of madness because of that almost invisible clerk with his hair of a whipped dog, whose clothing worthy of a rabbi in disgrace, and whose solemn manner could not perturb anyone's heart. But she soon repented of her first impression, for Florentino Ariza placed himself at her unconditional service without knowing who she was. He never found out. No one could have understood her as she did. Oh, no one could have understood her as he did. Oh, that was the secrecy of all this. That's the reason why Florentino Ariza was able to seduce all these women, because he understood women and he placed women on top of a podium, of a plinth, if you would. He seduced them by seeing them eye to eye and feel their emotions. We're going to walk through that in a minute. But she soon repented of her first impression, for Florentino Ariza placed himself at her unconditional service without knowing who she was. He never found out. No one could have understood her as he did, so that he did not ask for identification or even for her address. His solution was very simple. She would pass by the telegraph office on Wednesday afternoons so that he could place her lover's answers in her hand and nothing more. And yet, when he read the written message that Hildebranda brought him, he asked if she would accept a suggestion, and she agreed. Florentino Ariza first made some corrections between the lines, erased them, rewrote them, had no more room, and at last tore up the page and wrote a completely new message that she thought very touching. When she left the telegraph office, Hildebranda was on the verge of tears. "He's ugly and sad," said to Fermina, "but he is all love." Isn't that amazing? A man who didn't have the looks or the presence, but had the emotions and the feelings made possible and in love. This is amazing. Anyway, so I'm reading next Monday. We continue the story. We are now officially, no, actually, we have a few pages to go, but we are on page 129. Sorry, I have to look at this because I think I need bifocals. We're on page 129, and we'll continue to read the story next Monday in English, and this Friday, like every Friday at noon in Spanish, en español, for all of you. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the reading today. I'll talk to you soon, or I'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.